It was a bright Monday morning in Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso. The sun rose gently above the city, casting gold and light over the rooftops. At the presidential palace, the guards stood tall and alert as President Ibrahim Traoré stepped out, dressed simply in a neat dark brown shirt and trousers. He looked calm but determined. Unlike other days filled with long meetings and official duties, this day was different. President Traoré had a plan. One he had shared with no one except his driver. He wanted to visit the central prison without warning. No press, no media, no preparation, just himself in his heart. "Drive me to the prison," he told his driver. "I want to see how the people in there are living." No one must know. The driver was shocked but did not ask questions. He nodded and started the engine. The black, presidential vehicle left the palace quietly, escorted by only two plain police cars. About 40 minutes later, the car stopped in front of the largest prison in the city, Ouagadougou Central Correctional Facility. It was a dusty place surrounded by high gray walls topped with barbed wire. The guards at the gate were confused when they saw who was in the car. The president of the country was standing at their gate like an ordinary visitor. "Mr. President," one of them stammered, quickly opening the gate. "We were not informed." "I know," President Traoré replied firmly. "That is why I came. Take me inside." The prison warden, a short man named Monsieur Pascal, came rushing to greet him, sweating heavily. "Sir, if only we had known, we would have prepared." "I am not here for preparation," the president said, walking past him. "Take me to the prisoners. I want to speak with them." Still confused, Pascal obeyed. He led President Traoré down a narrow hallway filled with echoes of footsteps and the distant sounds of coughing, shouting, and sorrow. The smell was strong. Dust, sweat, and hopelessness hung in the air. As the president entered the main prison block, hundreds of inmates stopped whatever they were doing. Some were sitting on the floor playing cards. Others were lying down looking tired. A few were praying silently. One by one, they stood up, surprised, confused, and amazed. The president greeted them humbly, shaking hands and asking them questions. "How long have you been here? What crime were you accused of? Do you have family?" Most of the prisoners responded with fear, unsure if this was a trick or a miracle. But the president listened patiently, his eyes meeting each man's eyes with kindness and respect. After an hour of moving from cell to cell, something happened. The president noticed a man sitting quietly in the corner of a small, dark cell. The man was not talking like the others. He was not even standing. His head was bowed and his face was tired. He looked like someone who had lost everything. President Traoré walked closer and stopped in front of him. "What is your name?" he asked. The man looked up slowly, his eyes filled with pain and sadness. "Emmanuel," he said softly. "How long have you been here, Emmanuel?" 7 years, sir." "What was your crime?" Emmanuel swallowed hard. "They said I stole money from my boss, but I did not. I worked for him for many years. He accused me because he wanted to get rid of me and hire his nephew. I had no lawyer. No one believed me. I am a poor man." The president looked into Emmanuel's eyes. Something about him was different. There was no hate, no bitterness, just quiet pain, the kind that comes from being abandoned and wrongly judged. "What did you not appeal?" "I tried," Emmanuel whispered. "But I have no money. My wife left me. My children were taken away. No one visited me in all these years." A deep silence filled the room. The other prisoners listened. Even the prison guards were quiet. Everyone could see that the president was moved. President Traoré stood there for a long time, then finally spoke. "I believe you, Emmanuel." The warden gasped. "Mr. President," I said, "I believe him." The president repeated, "And I will find out the truth." Turning to the guards, he gave an order. "Bring me his case file before the end of today. I want every detail: who arrested him, who judged the case, and who was the accuser." "Everything." "Yes, sir." They answered quickly. Then he looked at Emmanuel again and said, "Your story is not over. I give you my word." As he walked out of the prison block, every prisoner stood in silence. Something had changed in the air. Hope, which had been buried for so long, began to rise again. Outside the prison, the president told his driver, "Cancel my meetings today. I am going to the Ministry of Justice." "Oh, but sir." "No excuses. A man's life is waiting." And with that, the black vehicle drove off once more. This time it was not just carrying a president, but a mission of justice. President Ibrahim Traoré sat silently in his office at the Ministry of Justice. The air conditioner hummed softly, but it could not cool the heat he felt in his chest. Emmanuel's face refused to leave his mind. Those eyes, tired but honest, haunted him. He had met thousands of people, shaken hands with leaders from around the world, but there was something different about that man. "Get me the Chief Justice," he said firmly to his aide. "I want him here now." The aide nodded and rushed out. Moments later, Justice Minister Duff arrived, adjusting his tie nervously. He knew this was not a regular meeting. The president looked serious. Too serious. "Mr. President, you asked to see me urgently," he said, trying to sound calm. "Wes," Traoré replied. "I visited Ouagadougou Central Prison this morning. I met a man named Emmanuel. He has been locked up for 7 years. For a crime he insists he did not commit. 7 years for a crime he insists he did not commit." Diouf hesitated. "Sir, the courts." "The courts failed him," Traoré said sharply. "His case must be reopened. I want to know who judged it, who arrested him, and why he had no legal support. This is not just about Emmanuel. It is about how many more like him may be suffering in silence." "Yes, sir," Duff said, lowering his eyes. "I will personally go through his case file." "Not just you," Traoré said. "Set up a fresh team. Independent eyes, no politics, no games. I want truth and justice." Within hours, a small task force of honest lawyers and human rights officers was formed. They began digging into Emmanuel's file. What they found was shocking. The case had been handled by a corrupt judge who had been dismissed years ago for accepting bribes. Emmanuel's employer, a wealthy businessman named Laurent Gira, had used his influence to speed up the trial. No lawyer had defended Emmanuel, and the only evidence against him was a poorly written statement. One Emmanuel claimed he was forced to sign into threat. "This is terrible," said one of the officers. The man was framed. The whole trial was a setup. That evening, the president received the full report. He read every line carefully. When he reached the end, he closed the file slowly and whispered, "I knew he was telling the truth." The next morning, he returned to the prison. This time with cameras and reporters. The nation watched in shock as President Traoré entered Emmanuel's cell again, this time with hope in his eyes. "Emmanuel," he said warmly, "I have read your file. You were not only wrongly accused, you were abandoned by a system that should have protected you. I am sorry." Emmanuel blinked confused. "Sir, you are going home," the president said. "Today?" Gasps echoed around the prison. Emmanuel looked around like he was dreaming. "Is this real?" he asked, tears welling in his eyes. "Yes, it is," Traoré said. "You are a free man." A crowd had gathered outside the prison by the time Emmanuel stepped out. He looked thinner, older, and unsure. He held no bag. He had nothing. But the sun that fell on his face that day was not the same sun that shone when he entered prison 7 years ago. Reporters rushed toward him. "How do you feel, sir? What will you do now?" Emmanuel looked down at his hands, then up at the sky. "I do not know," he said softly. "I have no family, no house, no job. That is enough for now." President Traoré placed a hand on his shoulder. "You are not alone." He took a man who will into his official car and drove him to the presidential guest house. For the first time in years, Emmanuel bathed with clean water, ate real food, and slept on a soft bed. The next day, President Traoré invited him to the palace. I want to hear everything, the president said. Your childhood, your job, your dreams. Emmanuel told him about growing up in a small village, how he had worked hard as a clerk, how he had married young, and how everything had crumbled when he was arrested. Wanted to be a teacher, he said, but life had other plans. The president nodded. Well, life has changed again, and this time you are in charge. Emmanuel smiled faintly, the first real smile in years. That afternoon, President Traoré called a press conference. He stood before the cameras and said, "Today we correct a mistake, but this is not just about one man. We must fix a broken system. No citizen should suffer in silence. I will not rest until our justice system protects the innocent and punishes the guilty fairly." He turned to Emmanuel, who stood beside him in borrowed clothes, his hands shaking. Meet Emmanuel. He is not a criminal. He is a survivor, and he is now part of a new task force to help us investigate other wrongful imprisonment across the country. The crowd burst into applause. Emmanuel's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were tears of hope. And just like that, a man forgotten by the world became a symbol of justice and change in Burkina Faso. The news spread across Burkina Faso like wildfire. Every newspaper, radio station, and television channel carried the same headline. President Traoré frees. Innocent man after surprise prison visit. But for President Ibrahim Traoré, Emmanuel's release was just the beginning. Call for a national audit, he told Minister Duff the next morning. I want the files of every prisoner who has served more than 5 years, especially those without legal support. Yes, sir, D. Duff said, though clearly overwhelmed. That is a huge task. Then we must start now, Traoré replied. One innocent person in jail is one too many. Meanwhile, Emmanuel had begun settling into the presidential guest house, but he did not feel like a guest. He felt like a stranger in a new world. Everything had changed while he was locked away. The roads were different. Technology had advanced. People spoke faster. Life outside was louder, quicker, and more confusing. One evening he sat in the garden behind the guest house, watching the sunset. A young aide named Joseph approached and offered him a small notebook and a pen. The president thought you might want to write your story, Joseph said. Emmanuel nodded slowly, then opened the notebook. On the first page he wrote, 7 years in silence. Then he stared at the words for a long time. The next day, President Traoré invited Emmanuel to a special meeting at the Ministry of Justice. Seated around the large table with senior lawyers, prison officers, and a few representatives from human rights groups. Today, the president began. We are going to listen to the unheard. He turned to Emmanuel. Please speak, they must hear your story. Emmanuel stood slowly. He looked around the room and took a deep breath. I was 28 when I was arrested. I was accused by the man I had served for 8 years. No one asked for my side. I was beaten. I was forced to sign a confession I did not write. At the trial, I stood alone. The judge did not ask me questions. He only read the charges and declared me guilty. I was sent to prison for 15 years. He paused, his voice shaking. In prison, I lost everything. My wife sent me divorce papers. My children stopped writing. My friends disappeared. I tried to stay strong, but each day felt like dying slowly. The room was silent. Even the most powerful officials could not look him in the eye. I am not here to blame. Emmanuel continued. I am here to ask how many more people are like me. Who will speak for them? President Traoré clapped, and soon everyone joined in. Not because they were told to, but because they were moved. From that moment, Emmanuel became more than a symbol. He became a voice. The president appointed him as the head of a new committee, the Justice Review Task Force. Their job was to travel around the country, visit prisons, listen to inmates, and find other innocent people who had been forgotten by the system. Their first stop was a prison in Bobo Dioulasso. It was smaller than the central prison in Ouagadougou, but just as overcrowded. Emmanuel, now wearing a white shirt with a badge that read, "Justice for All," walked through the gates with confidence. Inside, he met a man named Isidore, who had been in prison for 12 years. The charge armed robbery. But there were no witnesses, no fingerprints, and the weapon had never been found. "Why are you still here?" Emmanuel asked gently. Isidore looked up with tears. "Because I have no one, and no one believes me." "I believe you," Emmanuel said. "The same words President Traoré had once said to him, and I will help you." Back in the capital, President Traoré was working harder than ever. He met with judges, police officials, and legal experts. He ordered training programs to help police understand human rights better. He told judges that rushing cases without proper evidence would no longer be accepted. "This is not a favor," he told them. "It is a duty." In the following weeks, the Manuel's team found 27 other prisoners who had no clear evidence against them. Some had no case files at all. Others had already completed their sentences, but were never released due to errors in documentation. President Traoré took action on every report. He signed releases. He approved retrials. He compensated the wrongly imprisoned. The country watched in awe. Never before had a leader taken such a personal interest in the lives of ordinary people, especially those behind bars, but not everyone was pleased. Some powerful men who once controlled the justice system began to complain. "The president is making us look like fools," they said behind closed doors. "He is digging too deep." They did not know that President Traoré was not afraid. He had made a promise to himself and to Emmanuel that he would not stop until justice reached the deepest corners of the nation. One night, during a national television interview, the host asked, "Why did you take this so personally, sir?" The president smiled. "Because justice should never be a privilege for the rich. It should be the right of every citizen, rich or poor, educator or not, free or in prison." Emmanuel reminded me that leadership is not about power. It is about people. That answer made headlines the next morning. Leadership is about people. President Traoré speaks on justice reform. From every region, people began writing letters to the president thanking him. Some shared their own stories, others asked for help. Many simply said, "Thank you for listening." But the journey was not over. In a small village near Kaya, a woman wrote a letter. It was short but powerful. "My son was taken by mistake. He has been imprisoned for 9 years. Please help us." The letter landed on President Traoré's desk just as he finished reading Emmanuel's notebook. He closed the book and whispered, "We are just getting started." The morning breeze in Ouagadougou carried a strange mix of hope and tension. At the presidential office, President Ibrahim Traoré sat at his desk, holding the hand-written letter from the woman in Kaya. Her words were few, but they carried weight. "My son was taken by mistake. He has been imprisoned for 9 years. Please help us." He turned to his aide. "Prepare for a visit to Kaya. Tell Emmanuel to join me." Within hours, a convoy left the capital, heading northeast toward the dusty village. The road was long and rough, but President Traoré did not complain. Emmanuel sat quietly beside him, holding a small notebook and pen. Since his release, he had taken the habit of recording every case they encountered. "I wonder how many more letters like this we will get," Emmanuel said. The president nodded. "Until justice lives in every home, we keep moving." By late afternoon, they arrived in Kaya. The village was poor and quiet. The air smelled of dry grass and wood smoke. Children stopped playing when they saw the black cars. Women peeked from their huts, wondering what had brought the president country to their humble community. An old woman stepped forward slowly. She was barefoot, wearing a faded wrapper and blouse. Her eyes were swollen from crying, but she managed a small bow. "Welcome, Mr. President," she said with trembling hands. "I am the one who wrote the letter." President Traoré walked to her and took her hands in his. "Thank you for writing. Tell me everything. The woman, named Mama Florence, told the story of her only son, Jacob. He had been just 19 when he was arrested. A local shop had been robbed, and Jacob had been nearby, walking home from work, because he had no identification and looked nervous. The police took him in. Within 2 days he was sent to prison, without trial, without proof, without a lawyer. I went to the police station many times. Anna Florence cried. They told me the case was closed. I sold my goats to pay for transport to the city to look for him, but I was too poor. I gave up. I prayed instead. Emmanuel wrote every word in his notebook. The president placed a hand on the old woman's shoulder. You did the right thing by writing to me. We will find Jacob. The convoy left for Chiamregional prison immediately. It was a small, crumbling building surrounded by a rusted fence. The prison staff did not expect visitors, certainly not the president of the country. Get me Jacob's file, the president ordered. The prison officer scratched his head. Sir, we do not have a file for a Jacob. What do you mean? Emmanuel asked. Some prisoners were never processed properly. The officer admitted. We only keep paper logs. Some of them are missing, the officer admitted. President Traoré, Ray's face tightened. Show me the logbook. They brought an old brown book. Its cover cracked and pages torn, stained by time and carelessness. After flipping through carefully, Emmanuel found an entry. Jacob F., arrested on suspicion of theft. No release date, no trial date, no signature, no follow-up. Emmanuel whispered. He has been buried alive in here. The president stood sharply. Take me to him. They were led through dark hallways and narrow doors until they reached a small cell in the far corner. Inside, a man sat on the floor, his back against the wall, his beard thick, his hair unkempt. He looked up slowly as they entered, his eyes adjusting to the unfamiliar light. Jacob, the president said. The man blinked, confused. Wes, I am President Ibrahim Traoré. We have come for you. Jacob sat in disbelief. Men, yes. Your mother wrote to me. At first, Jacob did not move. His lips trembled, then tears began to roll down his cheeks. He had not heard his mother's voice or seen sunlight properly in 9 years. He had given up long ago. Please, he said softly. Do not lie to me. I am not lying, Traoré replied. You are going home. They walked him out of the cell. Every prisoner along the corridor stared in silence and shock. It was not every day that a forgotten man was rescued by the president himself. At the gates, Mama Florence was waiting. When Jacob saw her, he froze. Mama? He whispered. My son, she cried, running into his arms. I knew we're alive. I knew. They wept together. Even the guards wiped their eyes. Emmanuel stood close, clutching his notebook tightly. It was another story, another life saved from silence. President Traoré called a press briefing, Ryan Kaya, holding Jacob's old logbook high in the air. He declared, "This is not justice. This is failure. This cannot continue." He announced a new law on the spot. Every prisoner must be reviewed within 6 months of arrest. No one could be held without proper records. Every region would be required to digitize all files within 1 year. Any officer found to be holding innocent people would be investigated and punished. The crowd clapped. Hope stood again across the land. On the drive back to the capital, Emmanuel turned to the president. How did we allow this to happen for so long? We stopped listening. Traoré answered. That is the danger of power. You begin to hear only the loud and forget the silent. Emmanuel nodded, then opened his notebook. On the top of a fresh page he wrote, "Justice is not given. It is earned and protected." The next day Jacob was given new clothes, a clean shave, and a hot meal. His mother could not stop smiling. The president awarded him a scholarship to return to school and gifted his mother a new house in Kaya. As the sun set over the capital, President Traoré looked at the growing pile of letters on his desk. More voices, more cries for justice. He knew his work had only just begun. The walls of the presidential office in Ouagadougou were no longer filled only with official files. Now, they were covered with letters of hope. Since the story of Jacob's release, the palace had received thousands of messages. Some were hand-delivered by poor villagers. Others came from city lawyers, pastors, market women, and even prison guards. They all carried one message. Please listen to our case too. President Ibrahim Traoré stood before a large map of Burkina Faso, red pins marking every prison in the country. He had added more pins every week. We need to move faster, he told Emmanuel and the task force. The people are watching us now. We must not fail them. Emmanuel nodded. We can form smaller teams and spread out to more regions. We already have trained volunteers. Traoré smiled. Good, let us break every chain that was wrongly tied. That same week, the president signed an executive order creating Operation Justice Light, a national campaign to review the cases of long-serving prisoners. Under this operation, every prison in the country would be visited by legal teams, doctors, and human rights officers. The program was launched in Tenkadogo, a town in the central eastern part of the country. The old prison there had a dark reputation. Inmates were packed like goods. Many had not seen a judge in years, and when the review team arrived, the warden tried to delay them. These men are criminals, the warden insisted. They do not deserve freedom. Emmanuel stepped forward. They do not deserve freedom. Emmanuel stepped forward. No one said we are setting criminals free. We are only reviewing the truth. He pointed to a young man sitting silently in the corner. What about him? The warden hesitated. He has been here for 10 years. I do not remember his case. Then that is the problem, Emmanuel said firmly. You kept a man in a cage and forgot his name. The young man's name was Thomas. He had been arrested during a protest at the age of 17. His parents had died while he was in custody. He had no lawyer, no trial, and no contact with the outside world. President Traoré received the report that same night. Release him, he ordered without hesitation, and suspend the warden. Within 48 hours, Thomas was free, and the warden was removed from duty. The operation continued, and the findings were alarming. Across 6 prisons, over 200 inmates were found either innocent or held without trial. Many had slipped into the cracks of a broken system. Poor, forgotten, voiceless. Some were jailed for crimes as minor as stealing bread during a famine. Others had been wrongfully accused by corrupt landlords or political enemies. At every prison, Emmanuel stood tall, not just as a former prisoner, but as a symbol. His past pain had become his present power. He represented the silent men whose lives had been reduced to inkless pages and locked cells. During a private meeting at the palace, President Traoré sat with a group of newly released men. Tell me, he said, what would you do if given a second chance? One man replied, I would become a teacher. I want to help children understand their rights. Another said, I want to farm. I want to grow food and feed people. Emmanuel smiled at both. Then you must do it and do it well. Let your freedom speak louder than your silence. President Traoré decided to go even further. He announced the creation of the Freedom Restoration Fund, a national program to support innocent former prisoners with education, housing, and employment. Many of them have no homes to return to, he told the nation in a televised speech. Their lives were stolen, and we must give back what we can, not as a favor, but as justice. The people cheered. For the first time in decades, the government was not merely speaking about justice. It was delivering it. Soon documentaries were made about the campaign. Journalists from outside Africa flew in to witness the reforms. International human rights groups praised Burkina Faso for taking bold, unprecedented steps. But with the rising praise came resistance. Behind closed doors, some top officials grumbled. This campaign is making the Justice Department look like a failure, the senior judge said. People now think everyone in jail is innocent, another added. This will encourage more criminals to lie. President Traoré heard of the complaints, but did not waver. In a nationally broadcast address, he responded, "Let me be clear. Justice is not about protecting our pride. It is about correcting our wrongs. If the system is broken, then we must fix it, no matter how uncomfortable that may feel." His words silenced many critics. One evening, President Traoré visited the Ouagadougou Central Prison again, this time without the media. He wanted to see and speak with the men personally. As he walked through the same corridor where he once met Emmanuel, he noticed something had changed: hope. Prisoners greeted him with respect, but more importantly, with confidence. They no longer looked like men who had given up. A young inmate named Salo approached him. "Mr. President, I just want to say thank you. I am still serving time, but now I believe someone is listening." President Traoré shook his hand and said, "Everyone deserves a voice. And as long as I am president, no one will be left in the dark." He turned to the guards: "Treat them as human beings. Discipline is necessary. Cruelty is a failure." Back at the palace, Emmanuel received a letter from a man named Austin, a former prosecutor who had judged over 300 cases. "I want to confess. I was forced to convict people I was not sure were guilty. I want to help you now." Emmanuel took the letter to President Traoré. The president read it and smiled faintly. "Then let him come. It is time for justice to come from both sides, the hurt and the healer." As Operation Justice Light entered its third month, the chains were not only breaking inside prison cells. They were breaking in hearts, minds, and laws. And when President Traoré must rise, and it begins with justice. The city of Ouagadougou buzzed with conversation. From noisy markets to quiet mosques, from school classrooms to late-night radio stations, everyone was speaking of one thing: President Ibrahim Traoré's mission of justice. Families who had long given up hope now had reason to believe again. But as Operation Justice Light unearthed more cases of wrongful imprisonment, it began to shake deeper and more dangerous roots. Some of the names involved in past convictions were powerful: judges, politicians, business tycoons. Among them was one name Emmanuel would never forget. Emmanuel would never forget. Laurent Gier, the man who had falsely accused him 7 years ago. Emmanuel sat in his office at the Justice Review Task Force, flipping through a list of pending prison cases when he saw it again. Guerrero Enterprises, complaint against 5 former workers. He froze. "It's him," Emmanuel whispered. His assistant looked up. "Who?" "The man who destroyed my life." President Traoré was in a meeting when Emmanuel entered abruptly, holding the file tightly against his chest. "I'm sorry to interrupt, sir," he said, breathing heavily, "but you need to see this." The president took the file and scanned it. "Laurent Gier," he read aloud. "Yes, sir," Emmanuel confirmed. "He's still doing it, framing innocent people, just like he did to me." Traoré frowned. "Why has he never been investigated?" "He has connections," Emmanuel said bitterly. "That's how he escaped punishment. He bribed the judge, paid off the... That's how he escaped punishment. He bribed the judge, paid off the police, and now he's doing it again." The president stood slowly, eyes resolute. "Then we stop him." That very day, President Traoré established a special commission to investigate Guerrero Enterprises. Independent lawyers, senior police officials, and investigative journalists were assigned to the task. Within a week, the findings were damning. Falsified documents, forged witness reports, and a long history of complaints from former employees who had been wrongfully imprisoned or silenced. One former security guard, Pascal, had spent 4 years in prison after being falsely blamed for a theft. "They told me to sign a confession, or they would kill my wife," Pascal testified. "I was scared, so I signed." Another worker, Awa, had been jailed for 3 years, merely for exposing the company's illegal labor practices. When President Traoré read the final report, he shook his head in disbelief. This man has built his empire on the pain of others. At a press conference, he announced, We are now going after those who use the justice system for personal gain. The days of bribery and fake accusations are over. The next morning, Lauren Gay was arrested. The news stunned the country. Gay, once hailed as a successful businessman and a pillar of the national economy, now stood in the handcuffs, exposed as a predator of justice. Emmanuel watched the arrest quietly from the side. He neither cheered nor cried. He only felt a strange, quiet peace inside. A pain finally lifted. "Justice," he whispered at last. During the trial, Gay refused to speak at first, but as witness after witness stepped forward, as forged documents were examined in court, the truth became undeniable. Even the judge who had sentenced Emmanuel was summoned. Under public scrutiny and the weight of conscience, he confessed. "Yes," the judge admitted. "I took money. I was promised a promotion. I failed the law. I failed the people." That day, the courtroom was packed. Emmanuel sat in the front row beside President Traoré. The entire nation watched. The judge turned to Emmanuel. "I ruined your life," he said. "I do not ask for forgiveness. I only ask that you never let this happen again." Emmanuel rose slowly, his voice calm and unwavering. "You took 7 years from me, but you taught me something. Justice must be protected, not by the powerful, but by the brave." The courtroom erupted in applause. 2 days later, the ruling came. Lauren Gay was sentenced to 18 years in prison. The judge was dismissed and stripped of all honors. Victims like Pascal and O received state compensation, and Emmanuel, he was finally declared a man of honor by the National Assembly. President Traoré gave a speech to mark the occasion. "This is a new dawn. Let the powerful know your titles will not shield you from justice, and let the poor know you are not invisible. We see you, we hear you, and we will fight for you." Across Burkina Faso, the people rejoiced. For the first time in generations, justice was not just a word. It was an action, a movement. Emmanuel, now known as the voice of the voiceless, was invited to speak at universities, conferences, and schools across the nation. He taught young people about their rights, about law, and about the power of truth. But he remained humble. "I am not a hero," he often said. "I am just one of many. My story could have been forgotten. But someone listened, and that changed everything." One quiet afternoon, after another long day of work, Emmanuel returned to the prison where it all began. He walked through the familiar old corridors and sat with inmates still serving their sentences. "Do not lose hope," he told them gently. "Even silence can be broken. Your voice matters. Keep speaking. Someone will hear you." That evening, President Traoré called Emmanuel. "There's more work ahead," he said. "The justice system is like a garden. If we stop caring for it, weeds will grow again." Emmanuel nodded on the phone. "Then we must keep planting seeds of truth." And so the mission continued, not just to free the wrongly accused, but to rebuild a nation where justice lived in every home, every village, and every heart. 1 year had passed since President Ibrahim Traoré had stepped into that dusty prison and met Emmanuel, the man with sad eyes and a quiet spirit. Burkina Faso was no longer the same. The justice system had been shaken, clean and reborn. But perhaps the greatest transformation was not in the laws or prisons. It was in the heart of a man once forgotten by the world. Emmanuel was no longer just a name in a dusty prison logbook. He had become a national voice, a teacher, and a partner in governance. President Traoré saw in him something rare. Humility mixed with strength. Pain turned into power. One morning, over a quiet breakfast at the palace, the president leaned forward and said, "I have one final proposal for you, Emmanuel. I want you to become special advisor on national justice and human rights. You will work directly with me, not just for prisoners, but for every voiceless citizen in this country." Emmanuel was stunned. "Mr. President, I do not have the education for such a role." Traoré smiled. "You have something better, experience, truth, and a heart for people. That is what real leadership needs." Emmanuel accepted the role with tears in his eyes. Within weeks, he moved into a new office beside the president and began building a national program to educate citizens, especially in rural areas, about their legal rights. He launched a support line where families could report injustice without fear. His vision was clear. Justice must start before prison, not after it. He traveled to remote villages, sometimes by foot or motorcycle, listening to stories under mango trees and in dusty classrooms. He met grandmothers still waiting for sons to return, wives who never knew where their husbands had been taken, and orphans punished for crimes they never committed. "Let me be a voice," Emmanuel would say. "Tell me everything." And in return, he gave them something even more powerful: hope. Meanwhile, President Traoré was receiving international praise for his bold reforms. Leaders across Africa visited to learn from Burkina Faso's prison-ordered model. Human rights organizations applauded the tuk-tuk to expose internal corruption. But the president remained humble. "I did not do it alone," he said in an interview. "I was led by a man the world once ignored. Now he leads with me." On the first anniversary of Operation Justice Light, a national event was held in the capital stadium. President Traoré and Emmanuel stood before thousands. Around them were hundreds of former prisoners who had been freed and supported back into society. Each wore a white sash with the words, "Justice Restored." One by one, they stepped forward to share how their lives had changed. Some had opened farms, others had become mechanics, teachers, and leaders in their communities. They were no longer marked by the years they lost, but by the futures they had built. Emmanuel gave the closing speech. He stood silently for a moment, looking out at the sea of faces. He stood silently for a moment, looking out at the sea of faces. Then he spoke. "I once thought my life was over. I once thought silence was my only companion. But today I stand here not as a victim, but as a partner in rebuilding justice. I forgive those who hurt me. I thank the one who listened. And I challenge every one of you: listen to the unheard, stand for the unseen, speak for the voiceless. Because justice is not a luxury, it is a right, and together we must protect it." The stadium erupted in cheers. Tears flowed freely. That night, people across Burkina Faso lit candles in their homes, celebrating Justice Day for the first time in the nation's history. Back at the palace, President Traoré and Emmanuel sat in quiet reflection. "You've done well," the president said. "No," Emmanuel replied, smiling. "We have done well." And in that silence, two men, once separated by position and pain, sat as equals, not as president and prisoner, but as brothers in purpose, bound by truth. The next morning, a man will return to his old cell at Ouagadougou Central Prison, not as a prisoner, but as a guest of honor. The cell had been left untouched since his release. A small plaque now hurrying on the wall. This cell once held a man the world forgot, but it also held the spark that set justice free. Emmanuel closed the cell door gently behind him, stepped into the sunlight, and walked into a future he had once never imagined. The chains were broken. The truth had come out, and Burkina Faso would never be the same again.